and welcome to the Sports Talk Middle East and Golf Digest Middle East Ryder Cup video podcast. As you can see behind us, the crowds are exiting at the end of day two. Myself, Ben Jacobs and Robbie Greenfield will be looking back on the action, and what a day it's been, Robbie. In a perverse kind of way, this has actually been much more gripping than perhaps we realised just a few hours ago. It looked like being a procession for the Americans, but in the end, two late and very narrow European team victories mean it's finished 10-6. So although you might still assume that the advantage is unassailable, we've seen a 10-6 recovery before. Europe had the lead then. It was at Brookline in 1999, so it's not now impossible that Europe could be retaining this Ryder Cup.
Absolutely not, Ben. Let me tell you though one thing, the odds are still heavily, and I mean heavily, in the Americans' favour. To put this into some kind of perspective, 4 years ago at Valhalla, under Paul Azinger, the Americans led 9-7 going into the singles at the Ryder Cup, and they ran out extremely comfortable winners, 16.5, 11.5. So let's not forget the daunting task that faces Team Europe, but what a finish. We saw Ian Poulter, a man possessed, a Ryder Cup monster, closing out with 5 birdies in a row to somehow cling on against an equally inspired Zach Johnson and Jason Duffner, and it's just been an incredible day here, a day that looked to be running away from the Europeans, but wow. What a finish, and yeah, it makes it interesting going into Sunday, that's for sure.
Well, it's galvanised the crowd, the Americans of course chanting USA, but plenty of Europeans now with a bit of fire in their belly. Now we'll look back at the morning session in just a moment, but first of all, specifically that finish, I'll give you some of the scores first of all. So in the afternoon 4 balls, we saw Johnson and Kuchar beat Nicholas Korsarts and Paul Lawrie 1-up. That was a very tense game. It was all square in the closing stages, unfortunately for Korsarts and Lawrie. They just weren't able to get it done at the 18th. Watson and Simpson seeing off Rose and Molinari 5 and 4. That was the real drubbing of the session. Now at that stage, it looked to an extent like the Americans might be running away with it 4-0 because they were ahead in all of the matches. But then there's a big turnaround that we're going to focus on for the next minute or so. Donald and Garcia beating Tiger Woods and Steve Stricker 1-up, and that leaves Woods and Stricker winless. Played 3, lost all of them, and then finally, as you mentioned, the birdie blitz by Ian Poulter along with his partner Rory McIlroy, who was really just a spectator in those last 5 holes. 5 straight birdies down the stretch to see off Duffner and Johnson 1-up. Just sensational golf, not just from Poulter, but others played their part as well, particularly Luke Donald, who holds some clutch putts himself down the stretch.
Absolutely, Donald and Poulter definitely the European heroes, especially Poulter in the last 4 holes. But really, I think we have to acknowledge, Ben, that today belonged to the Americans. They began the day 5-3 up, and immediately, as soon as we arrived almost at the club today, there was red on the board. They were up in all 4 matches. Keegan Bradley and Phil Mickelson have been the story of this Ryder Cup so far for the American team. What a partnership they've developed, and unbeaten in all their matches and winning comfortably, in fact, in all of them. It's just been a fantastic run, and the Americans, absolutely, the day belonged to them.
Now, why on earth did Jose Maria Olazabal, the European team captain, rest Ian Poulter in the afternoon session yesterday? Same format this afternoon. He's on fire. He's Mr. Ryder Cup. Do you in any way empathise with that decision, given that even at this stage yesterday, Europe needed points?
Well, I mean, it's all very well in hindsight to look back and say that was a crazy decision. I mean, there were lots of players. In fact, Luke Donald, he also rested, and Sergio Garcia. So I suppose the flip side of that is he wanted to give Hansen and Lawrie a game and get them into the spirit of the Ryder Cup. I think it's important for these players to actually get a match under their belt. You don't want to leave them cold going into the singles. But then you've got to look at Davis Love and the way he's managed his team, and we really have to pay Davis Love a huge amount of credit here, because he's stuck to all his same pairings. The Americans have had 6 pairs in this competition so far, and they've all gelled. Even Woods and Stricker, I know they've not won a point, but they are the obvious pairing, and they have had success in the past. But really, the other 5 American pairings have all looked very natural. Finally, we found a partner for Phil Mickelson and Keegan Bradley. Jason Duffner and Zach Johnson looked like they were cloned at birth. Such similar golfers, and Keegan, Webb Simpson and Dustin Bubba Watson, his partner, another pairing that just seemed to really bounce off each other, and they just seem to have a lot of chemistry on the course. So really, with Jose Maria chopping and changing his pairings around and not really knowing what his strongest pairing is, you've got to hand it to the Americans. Davis Love has played a blinder.
Well, as far as the morning session was concerned, these were foursomes of alternate shots, and again, Ian Poulter providing, with Justin Rose seeing off Watson and Simpson 1 up. The real standout match was an absolute drubbing of Lee Westwood and Luke Donald, 7 and 6 against Keegan Bradley and Phil Mickelson. Jason Duffner and Johnson seeing off Nicholas Colsaerts and Garcia. That's Dustin Johnson, of course, 2 and 1. And then Jim Furyk and Brad Snedeker seeing off Rory McIlroy and Graham McDowell 1 up. Now, you've already alluded to that immense partnership between Bradley and Mickelson. But I guess on the European side, the surprise is if we were going to be talking about an imperious partnership, perhaps McIlroy-McDowell, particularly given Celtic manner, was the one that should have stood out. But really, even though they did contribute on the opening morning, certainly as a pairing and as individuals, they didn't supply.
I think the players that we expected to play well on the European side coming into this event, the guys that have been playing so well, let's remember that Rory McIlroy in the last 5 or 6 weeks has had a spell of golf that has been compared to the heyday of Tiger Woods, of all people. I mean, it's just incredible. And I think you expect so much of Rory McIlroy, and it's clear that his putter has not worked for him this week. He hasn't really gelled too well with G-Mac either, who's also struggled a little bit for form. And our best players, our Donalds, our Westwoods, our McIlroys, just haven't quite found their top gear this week, and it's been left to the less experienced players. Nicholas Colsaerts yesterday, of course. Ian Poulter, who is just a Ryder Cup animal, as I think we're becoming increasingly aware. But really, what it boils down to is putts. We always say this: the Ryder Cup often turns into a putting contest, and today the Americans were draining them from all over the place. And I think we were out there this morning, and we didn't see a European hold putt.
No, we really didn't.
I mean, there was nothing really to cheer, and when you don't have that momentum, it's very difficult to get any kind of movement. The Americans really seized it, and they just kept it all day.
Yeah, and I mean, look, foursomes can be hard to get a birdie from, because effectively you're not always playing your own ball, but it's criminal in the 4-ball format not to record birdies. And the Europeans basically were just very slow out of the blocks. The amount of matches in both the morning and the afternoon where we saw the birdies start around the 8th, 9th, 10th, and the Americans were having 2 or 3 birdies in their first 4 or 5 holes. And even when we're critical of certain players, like Tiger Woods, his birdie stats are actually quite decent. 33 holes played, 11 birdies. That's 33%. That's more than he averages on the tour, and did, as I understand it, average on tour between his prime period of 1999-2002. Now, yes, this is only one event, so you can't exactly necessarily compare the two, but fundamentally, he will take flack because he's played 3 and lost 3, but he has sunk his fair share of birdies as well, as has the entire American team.
Well, Tiger's been very unlucky. I don't think anyone in the mood that Nicholas Colsaerts was in yesterday could have handled that. He actually made 7 birdies in that match, and he made 5 on the back 9 today. And he just came up against European teams who found the best kind of form that European sides have found all Ryder Cup. So Tiger Woods will come in for some flack inevitably. There's always so much scrutiny on his game anyway, particularly from the American media. So he definitely will come in for some flack. But it's not been about Tiger Woods this week. It's not been about the Lee Westwoods, the Luke Donalds, the Rory McIlroys, who we thought it was perhaps going to be about. It's been about the American rookies, their pairings. Ian Poulter, what a warrior he's become, and tomorrow is going to be a lot of fun. I mean, America should win this, and they should win it comfortably, let's be fair.
Well, we'll come on to our predictions in just a moment. I should point out that behind us is, of course, the first tee box. This is going to be buzzing when we get underway. First thing tomorrow, the singles, always the highlight of a Ryder Cup, and now there's something at stake. It's highly likely that the Europeans will have to top load their order to try and reduce this deficit. The Americans will be able to space the guys out just a little bit more, and it wouldn't really surprise any of us if Ian Poulter was to go out first. He said, you may remember at Celtic Manor, he will give his side a point in the singles just before he teed off, and he did, and he will be a favourite pretty much against anyone he comes up against, not necessarily because of talent alone, but because he's red hot currently with the putter and he has that fire in his belly. And so to the predictions. Now, I've always said America and you've always said Europe, but of course we can kind of wipe that to an extent.
I think I'm going to have to climb back down from that parapet.
We'll come to the specifics in a moment, but less so from where we started and more so from now. I'm going to ask you to stick to your European prediction, and I'm first going to make a case for the Americans, and then even if you don't agree with it, and I'll give you a chance to say who you think is going to win at the end of this, I want you to make a case for the Europeans at least, because that's who you predicted before anybody had hit a tee shot. As far as the Americans are concerned, massive favourites. Biggest Ryder Cup deficit is 10-6. That was Brookline, 1999. It was overturned. So history suggests that it is possible, but the Americans, as I've said all along, and I think Robbie will agree, 1 to 12 are stronger. And if this was a, let's say, six-person, I should say, event, and it was the top Europeans against the top 6 Americans, I could see a 6-0 European win to overturn a slightly smaller kind of deficit. But fundamentally, there's 12 points at stake, and I would argue that Keimer is a weak link, Hansen is a weak link, Laurie might be a weak link in the singles, Molinari's putting, there's a lot to be desired there. So fundamentally, because the Americans only need 4.5 more points, I just feel that whatever Europe's best players, if they prove to be Europe's best players on the day and actually perform, if they live up to their rankings and their nature, it still might be immaterial, Robbie, purely because it's a 1v1 12-point affair and the Americans have just got more depth. Now, can you counter that with anything that might suggest the Europeans have got a prayer?
I know, Ben, that I've been blowing the European trumpet all week, and having changed my mind after originally backing the Americans, but let's give it a go. I think he has to top load the order. Now, when I say he has to top load the order, of course that means sending out our big guns, our Westwoods and our Poulters and our Donalds. Now, they haven't always been on top of their form, so those guys are going to have to pull their socks up and really hit top gear if the European team has any chance whatsoever. I think he has to hide our weaker, less experienced players, our out-of-form players, Martin Keimer, Peter Hansen, Francesco Molinari. They haven't had great Ryder Cups. I think he has to kind of hide them, not right at the back, because he's going to need, if we're going to turn this around, we're going to need a reliable anchorman, because it will go down to the last man. So we're going to need a Graham McDowell, or someone who's got that kind of fire in his belly and an iron will, who can close it out. I wouldn't want to see Martin Keimer or Peter Hansen handed that task of bringing the Ryder Cup home. It's a massively tall order. I mean, if this was tennis, you'd be 2 sets to love down and 2 breaks down, I think, in the deciding set. This is the comeback to end all comebacks. So let's remember one more time. Europeans have done it before on American soil. They've come back from a deficit. That was 9-7 in 1995 at Oak Hill, a Seve Ballesteros and Nick Faldo-inspired comeback. Can the Europeans channel the spirit of Seve tomorrow and perform an even more miraculous comeback? I think it's very unlikely, but who knows? It should be some good drama.
Well, we shall see. Personally, I'm going to go for a 7-5 American singles victory, and thus final score, as far as I'm concerned, would be America 17, Europe 11. Robbie, specific score prediction?
Well, I'm going to have to stick to the European bandwagon, Ben, as you've cornered me. So I've got no choice, and I'm going to have to say that the Europeans will squeak. In fact, they will retain the Ryder Cup by tying the Ryder Cup at 14 apiece. I think that's how they're going to do it, and it's going to come down to a putt on the 18th hole, and that anchorman, Graham McDowell, once again is going to roll in a 10-footer to retain the Ryder Cup for Europe.
Well, it's a prediction that on paper appears almost as ridiculous as your Barnet. So you could definitely have got a haircut before the Ryder Cup. So, all gets underway right here tomorrow on the first tee, the final day of the Ryder Cup. It's always special, and fingers crossed from a European point of view, they can make that miraculous comeback. From myself, Ben Jacobs, the editor of Sports Talk, and Robbie Greenfield, the editor of Golf Digest Middle East. Thanks for listening.